And philosophically, he was at least a moderate Democrat, and some issues a liberal Democrat. He was smart in the sense that he didn't have too good a relationship with the UAW, but he was he was smart enough to build one with the AFL-CIO. And with George Weeks's help, he was very shrewd in building a relationship with the Free Press.
Yeah, George Weeks was the governor's press secretary and later his chief of staff, and a former Detroit News columnist and later Detroit News columnist.
And a friend of mine since my days with Phil Hart, when George was next door where the wire services were.
Oh, okay.
So
that's interesting.
Yeah, so good man.
Well, let me ask you about George Romney, Milliken's predecessor as governor, who was governor for 6 years, from 1963 until early '69 when he left to go to Washington. What were your impressions of George Romney during all these years, various different
Well, I admired his nature. It was intense. When he would give a speech on something he felt strongly about, you could hear Martin Luther talking, or Martin Luther King talking. He had an intensity about him, which was extremely convincing, and he, point that finger, and you would feel a sense of, wow, this must be right. We had a common thread that went between us. I happened to be, during my Michigan Catholic Conference days and during the Detroit riots, the chairman of the Michigan Advisory Committee of the United States Civil Rights Commission. And as you recall, Governor Romney was really thrown off balance during that riot. And I saw it firsthand when he called citizens together, and I was one, and Coleman and I sat right across the table.
Coleman Young,
Young,
state senator.
Senate Democratic leader at the time. And so George was trying to evince some approaches as to how to deal with this crisis, which was essentially rocking his presidential potential.
Because he was interested in running for president in 1968.
Yeah, but I'm getting off the track. The point I wanted to make is he came into the Constitutional Convention convinced that there were certain tenets in the Mormon religion that were susceptible to questioning when it came to racial equality. He was convinced he had to solve that question. And he knew of my background, so he wanted, assistance, advice, whatever, on that question. And he was true to his commitment, because in 1967 he took on open housing.
Right.
Open occupancy, it was called, and this was a battle.
Right.
And we were heavily involved in it, particularly with the Catholic legislators, of which, God bless him, Bob Mahoney put his job on the line.
Who is another state representative, a blind state legislator.
One of the all-time favorite people that I came across.
Still alive today?
Still alive. I've got some great stories, but we'll tell them at a later time. But talking about characters, one of my favorite characters, and I'm not talking about great political history here, I'm talking about just characters, was Senator Arthur Cartwright from Detroit. He owned, he was called slum landlord back then, but he wasn't. He owned some Detroit hotels in the inner city.
He was an African-American state senator from Detroit.
With a most colorful, rhetorical manner that I wish that I had recorded some of his sayings. I could have made a fortune from him. But the one that I remember was Perry Bullard, state rep from Ann Arbor, introduced a bill to ban aerosol spray cans because it was destroying the ozone layer. And Senator Cartwright was chairman of the State Affairs Committee at the time, and it passed the House, and he held a hearing in the Senate in which it was reported out on the floor. And one of the senators who told me this was in the room when most of the people had exited, and Arthur picks up this aerosol can, and he is looking at it. He's saying, I just can't imagine that this little bitty can destroy the air in the Ozarks. So Arthur had a way of saying things that were memorable. And go ahead.
I would say so.
But I got to tell you this story. I'll have to have explicative deleted, but there was, let's see how I can put this in perspective. Senator William B. Fitzgerald
yes.
was dethroned as Senate Majority Leader.
This was like late 76 or 77. Yeah.
Late
yeah.
76,
yeah.
correct. And the UAW was really mad. Frank Garrison wanted to strike back. So his methodology for striking back was to introduce a lobby reform bill. And it was sent to Arthur's committee. And it didn't come out in 76, it didn't come out in 77. Sometime in 78, the UAW went to Senator McCauley from Wyandotte, who was the Democratic caucus chair, and said, you got to call the caucus. We got to get this bill out. So they called the caucus. And they said, McCauley said to Arthur, Arthur, you got to report this bill out of committee. So Arthur stood up, hooked both thumbs in his vest pocket, looked around the room, and said, gentlemen, there once was a governor named Coomes Ziegler. Now it happened that Kim Ziegler introduced the first lobby reform bill of 1947. And Arthur continued and he said, and one day, and he was also, Governor Ziegler was his own pilot, one day the Lord whispered to Coomes, he said, Coomes, time to take a flight in your airplane. So Coomes is up there flying, and he's going flying, and the Lord grabs a hold of that plane and dashes that M blank to the ground. Arthur rears back, puts both fingers in his vest, and says, gentlemen, that's what the Lord thinks of political reform.
Oh, jeez.
So anyway, that's why he's one of my characters, my favorite characters.
And I think the bill never did get out of committee, did it?
Yes, it did.
But it didn't pass, did it?
Yeah, I think it passed, and it went to the Supreme Court, and Larry Lindenberg tossed it out. more than one purpose. So, but it eventually passed.
In some way, shape, or form. Well, there were some characters. There's no question about that. Absolutely.
Oh, boy.
All right, parochiate has just been defeated at the ballot box in 1970. A lot of things also are not going so well for what the mission of the Catholic Conference had continued to hope would be the case. Windows seem to be closing. Opportunities seem to be limited compared to what they had been for most of the decade of the 60s. What was going through your mind at that time?
Well, I felt like somebody that went to the moon, the journey to the moon, and then found out it was made of blue cheese, and I couldn't walk on it. At any rate, I felt not only exhausted, because this had been a 9-year effort, started 62 or so, and I was shattered, absolutely shattered. I did not know what I was going to do. I took about 10 days off and went to the Keys to just try to recover. I thought I was going to have a nervous